Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to become a boundary badass, then do we have the Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free show for you. Today I'll be talking with Nancy Levin, an all-time favorite guest of mine, the best-selling author of Worthy, Jump, The New Relationship Blueprint, and an incredible must-read on boundaries, Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free. And that's just what I want to talk with her about today, about how to tell the truth, create connection, and find freedom to become a boundary badass. That, plus we'll talk about 17-mile races and 13,000 feet. Gotcha. Louise Hay and Body Whispers, Brene Brown and Turning Rings, Saying No to Madagascar, The Danger of Unsolicited Feedback, Who on Earth Are the Three Sisters, and What in the World Wonder Woman, 4 a.m. flights, and briefcases have to do with anything. Oh, goody. So welcome back to the show, Nancy. Are you ready to shine?
I am, and I love you so much, Michael.
The feeling is so mutual, Nancy. Absolutely is. All right, so today we're going to talk a bit about your story, and then we're going to go to all things boundaries. But before we do that, what does Wayne Dyer briefcases and a 4 a.m. flight have to do with anything?
Boy, it has everything to do with boundaries and essentially how boundary-less I lived most of my life. So I was the event director at Hay House for 12 years, and I traveled the world with our authors and speakers, and it was the job of a lifetime. It was my dream job until it wasn't. But at this particular moment of this story about the briefcase, I was doing a tour for Wayne Dyer. We had just done an event in Atlanta on a Saturday afternoon, and we had an event in Detroit on Sunday afternoon. So there was a whole posse of us, my whole team, his whole crew, and we were all going to the airport after the event in Atlanta. We all flew to Detroit. We got settled in our rooms. We had dinner, and then we were saying goodnight. And no sooner did I make it back to my room did Wayne call me. And he said that he could not find his briefcase for the life of him. And in his briefcase were all the notes for the lecture the next day, notes for his new book. There was some money. There were personal things. And he absolutely needed his briefcase in order to go on stage. He needed his notes for the lecture. So I had this hunch that the briefcase was in the van we took to the airport back in Atlanta, because Wayne never traveled with a briefcase. He just used it to go back and forth between the hotel and the venue where he was speaking. But in this case, we were leaving right from the venue, going right to the airport. So it was kind of like an extra piece of luggage he wasn't used to having. And so I just had this hunch that it was in the van somewhere. And I called the car company in Atlanta, and they said, unfortunately, that van isn't due back here until about midnight. So I wait for it to be midnight. I call again, and I say, can you go check that van for the briefcase? And the guy, comes back on the phone, and he said, I'm sorry, we looked, we can't find it. And I said, here's the thing. It's midnight. It's dark. The briefcase is black. I know it's in there. Can you just go back out? Maybe it slid all the way from the front, all the way to the back, And lo and behold, the intuition was right, because they found the briefcase. But now it's after midnight, and Wayne is to go on stage at 2 p.m., this day. And being post 9/11, they wouldn't put one of their employees on a plane with his briefcase. So I now had to figure out a way to get the briefcase to me. And again, I want to reiterate, Wayne at no point had blamed me for this. Wayne was just insistent upon needing this, that he could not go on stage without this. And so I took on the role of needing to be the fixer, the savior, the one who can do anything and everything, superwoman, the whole thing, because I was really driven by all of that external validation, driven by wanting to be the one and the only one. So I made it my mission to get this briefcase. And I was in conversation with my with my travel agent. We're doing all of this on Saturday night, post midnight, the whole thing. And it is just becoming apparent that it is impossible to get this briefcase here. Unless,
Yep.
unless I get into a taxi and go to the airport at 4 a.m. And as I'm on my way to the airport, I am booking my flight online, round trip to Atlanta and back, to get me back in time for the event. And at this point, I had never
TSA was going to love you.
Well, exactly. And at this point, I'd never had any one of my staff run an event without me. So I was now frantically emailing my whole staff and the venue. And, we were expecting about 2,500 people. Here are the things that need to get done. I'll be back. And so I also called a car company. They arranged to have someone meet me at baggage claim. So I do one of those things of like, and I think Detroit and Atlanta are like the two biggest airports, like you can run through. But I get off the plane, I go to baggage claim, I get the briefcase. And as I'm coming back through, as you suspected, TSA, it's like ding, 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 ding. Didn't you just get off the plane? Why are you traveling back with just a briefcase? So there was a whole thing that was happening, but I did it. And I called Wayne once I was back on the plane, heading back to Detroit with the briefcase in my hand. And I called him and I said, Wayne, I have your briefcase. And he said, where are you? And I said, that is not important. I will see you at the venue. And he said, Nancy, did you do something crazy? And I said, Wayne, I'll see you at the venue. And then I literally pulled up at the venue at the same time he did. And there were hundreds of people, as there always were, surrounding the car when he pulled up. Everyone wants a hug and a picture and the whole thing. And I walk up to Wayne and I hand him the briefcase. And he joking around, tongue in cheek, said, oh, that old thing? I don't need that. At which point I promptly had to give him the finger.
Oh, no.
And so I flipped off the father of motivation. And then I was just going to say that, so I always introduced, I always emceed all of our events. And as I introduced him and brought him on the stage, and as I was leaving, he, held on to me and he said, I want to share with you what this woman just did for me. And it was really beautiful and wonderful. And the piece here is in retrospect, or not even in retrospect, in moving forward, would I do something like this again? Maybe, but I would do it from a different intention and motivation, because my motivation back then was, I want the accolades. I want the validation. I want to be the star. I want to be the one and the only one. And crossing my own boundaries was the only way I knew how to get that. So from this place now, would I do it again? Maybe, but not from a place of needing or trying to earn or validate my value or worth.
Do you think he saw that? Because if I understood the story right, he actually called and said, Nancy, what did you do?
Yeah. He did. He did. After all the joking around, which was a big part of who he was in our relationship too, he absolutely saw what I had done and he absolutely appreciated it and all that. But it was really more about the way that I approached it, as having to do this, really assessing my own value and worth by what I can do, as opposed to just who I am in my being.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Because of the nature of time, we may or may not get into your day of reckoning story. We'll see if that comes back around. But because we are all challenged, and if you're listening to the show, chances are you're sensitive, and I mean that in a good way, that you're empathic, you're able to feel other people's feelings, which means things get muddied. The waters get very, very difficult to see through. What is boundary blindness?
Yeah, so it's really when we don't have a sense of where we end and someone else begins. So I'll just start there. That if we're going to have this conversation about boundaries, we have to understand that first, and maybe I'll even define boundaries
Thank you.
as, for the way that I work with this. For me, boundaries are simply the limits that we set around what we will or will not do, will or will not tolerate, and will or will not accept. So it's our foundation. It's the way these are our limits. And the truth of the matter is that so many of us don't even know our limits. So many of us aren't even aware of what we will or will not do because we just go into the knee-jerk yes. We just go into the extreme doing, and we're taking everyone outside of us into account more than we take ourselves into account. And so this is the boundary blindness. We don't realize that there is any separation, or we don't realize that we can actually take ourselves into account as much, and I'm going to even say, if not more, than we take others into account. Because that's really what I'm on my soapbox about. I want you to take yourself into account more than you take others.
Well, it's interesting because we were talking about a plane flight, because we work with we work with the same audience in many ways.
Yes.
And I'm always challenging people to put the darn oxygen mask on yourself first. If you don't take care of yourself first and foremost, you have nothing to give anybody else.
That's right. That's right. And so it is about coming back and staying home here in understanding what are my preferences, what are my desires, what are my needs, and how do I then go about expressing them? Because for those of us, as we were saying before, for those of us who are empaths, for those of us who are overgiving, overachieving people pleasers, bending over backwards, not running to rock the boat, we will do whatever it takes to keep the peace at all costs. We will do whatever it takes to avoid conflict. But here's the thing. When we do whatever it takes a high toll on us. It comes at a high cost. And so we have to start taking ourselves into account. And we have to start, I often say, I'll say we have to take our own temperature first and not be looking outward at what's happening with anyone else. We need to get discerning in here first. I see this, this is a metaphor, but I see it literally too. We will set the table with the fine china and the silver and the crystal, and we will serve up the, big juicy steak or the big juicy tofu. And here then we are in the kitchen eating over the sink any of the scraps and crumbs that are left. And I want to invite us to be taking the head of the table, taking a seat.
Thank you. And there's an energetic cost at not doing that, because, yes, you said you might do it coming from a different perspective, but there is an energetic risk that if you're in the kitchen serving others and not serving yourself, you give them the fine china and you give yourself the beat up babyware, let us say, there is an entire possibility that you are going to attract more of that into your life, because that's the signal you're sending to the universe about how you're feeling about your own worth on some level.
Bingo, because, we will attract whatever will reinforce what we believe about ourselves. So we have it backwards. We think that we will know our worth, know our value, if something outside of us gives us the stamp of approval. We're chasing that approval and that validation. And yet it is a reversal. It's an inside job. It's going to come from inside first. And then that is what is going to be magnetized and reflected.
Thank you. So I want to talk about cultivating these boundaries, making it an inside job. How do we know if we need to set boundaries?
So we know we need to set boundaries if we, the number one telltale sign is if we're feeling resentful.
Yeah.
And we can be sure that if we are feeling the building resentment, that it is in direct proportion to how well or not we have set and maintained boundaries in our life. And so, a couple of things I want to say here are, so this is sort of like the secret that no one tells you about setting a boundary. That your boundary is yours to uphold and maintain and respect and honor. Your boundary isn't for anyone else to do that. Holding your boundary isn't anyone else's job. And this is where we get into a lot of confusion, because the resentment builds because we want to blame someone else. I tried to set a boundary, but my mother-in-law still keeps telling me how to parent my children. I tried to set a boundary, but my boss still asks me to stay late, on Friday nights, whatever it is. And we get into this trouble here because we think someone else is supposed to honor our boundary. And so we blame, and then we feel resentful, and then we are the martyr, and we're in the place of the victim. So the way to move into the empowerment is to move into responsibility. And this is how we move out of the resentment. We move out of the resentment by taking responsibility and not setting boundaries that we are not prepared to maintain. Because when we do that, we're like the little girl or boy who cried wolf.
Thank you. I want to go in a second into common myths with boundaries, but first off, you got me thinking about salary negotiation, something I work with a lot of clients on, particularly women clients, because if you say, well, I don't want to ask for that because X, Y, Z may happen, or I don't get the job, or I don't get this. This is setting the table. You were talking about the table earlier. The amount of resentment that will build up if you don't ask for what you're worth and build the boundary from day number one is huge. And that's actually going to do a disservice to your employer who you didn't want to hurt by asking for too much.
I'm with you all the way.
Woohoo! All right, let's talk about some common myths about boundaries. I can run through some, or you can give me some. I know the first one, love requires that we set no boundaries.
Right.
Oh, goody.
I know. Yeah. I think there are so many myths around boundaries. So it is that like love requires we set no boundaries, or if I set a boundary, I'm a can I say
I've got a bleep key. You're good.
Or some version of, it's mean to set a boundary. It's selfish to set a boundary, and these are the kinds of myths that this book starts to really bust, because I'll say from the outset, healthy boundaries are the key to living the life we desire and living a life where we feel free. And yet we look at boundaries as something that is contracting and constricting. But the invitation here, and I say this, at the early part of the book, because I want to invoke this, is that boundaries are also the way that we can carefully choose and consciously curate what we want to bring into our lives by setting boundaries. So there's a stigma with boundaries. People relate to boundaries like there's something bad.
Well, it really comes down to a two-letter word. Warren Buffett's the guy I want to think of. There was an article recently on Warren Buffett that said that the number one way he got wealthy was through the most simple word and boundary in the world.
Amen. No. Big time. And so many of us think that if we say no, we are going to invite criticism or conflict. And we're so conflict averse, conflict avoidant, that we end up going into the acquiescing and saying yes when what we really want to say is no. And I know that everyone listening can find an example, of doing this, of saying yes when we want to say no. And so part of this is really being able to be with the discomfort of saying no and understanding that, and this is really important, understanding that someone else's response to our truth is not our responsibility to manage. So we can't, yes, big time. We can't make someone angry. We can't make someone feel disappointed. That's up to them, how they're going to interpret and how they're going to be impacted. Their response is theirs. So if I'm, again, sort of back to when I was saying harmony at all cost, if I'm more invested in managing someone else's experience and I'm avoiding my truth, how honest is the relationship?
And sooner or later, it is going to come out. You talk about, and in your first marriage, that resentment, that desire for freedom, what's not being met, will come out sideways, one way or the other. And we hope it doesn't come out in the Louise Hay. First, you get something quiet in the body, the whisper of the soul, and then it gets louder and louder.
Yes. And Louise always said, your body, it will come loudest and fiercest in your body because you can't deny it. Your body will take you out. But I do believe that, when we don't tell the truth to ourselves, the truth does come out sideways. It will come out in illness, it will come out in self-sabotage or self-destruction. And it's all coming back to when we're not willing to take the look within to find out, is my life actually working for me? Am I living my own life, or am I living someone else's life? Am I living in a way where I'm packaging myself to be digestible to others? And all of this becomes a boundary issue because we have to really know our non-negotiables. We have to know how to make ourselves a priority instead of putting everyone else first.
Where does this stem? And then we're going to go through the 10 steps, but where does this come from? Because what I'm hearing, I'm thinking of Don Miguel Ruiz and the government of our mind. Somewhere along the line, we all tried to be, whether male or female, goody two-shoes in our kids. And that's really what's coming back out, isn't it? This desire to please.
Yes, the desire to please. And here's the thing, what we forget is if we're saying yes to someone else, we're saying no to us. And we're so used to taking the hit that we just continue the cycle of saying no to ourselves, and we're the ones who become our own oppressor.
There's a term that I just came up with you were talking about conflict avoidance. And I just came up with this term, risk and conflict for our highest good.
I love that. I do. I like it.
We have to put ourselves forward and absolutely step into that if we're going to live our lives. So let's go from there. Let's talk about the 10-step program. I'm calling it Boundary Badassery. Number 1, own that it's you who've been crossing your boundaries. It's not him. It's not her. It's ourselves.
Yeah, this is a big one. This is really a big one to really get us all to wrap our brains around, because we're so quick, like I was saying before, to say someone else is crossing my boundaries, or blaming someone else outside of us. So the big piece here is to first get on board with the whole idea that it is me crossing my own boundaries. I'm enabling it, I'm allowing it, and it's because, and the maintaining isn't happening because I haven't put something in action to take care of myself.
Thank you. And it comes, I'm going to repeat this. You said it earlier, but
Mm-hmm.
it's nobody else's job to maintain or respect your boundaries, period.
Right. Period.
Step number 2, take your boundary inventory.
Yeah. So, first of all, I will say most of us who think that we are not boundary people or not boundaried or don't know how to set boundaries, we can first just start to begin to look at where in my life have I set a boundary, even if it seems like it's something small, or even if it's in some way that I've asked for something that I've wanted. So I invite, the reader to really look at what are the ways in which you may have set a boundary in your own life, even around, a boundary against being harmed. I keep my door locked. It can be something as simple as that, where you start to realize that there is a way that you're honoring and protecting yourself. And then moving into looking at, what I go into more deeply around, sort of your beginner boundaries, and then what are, the next layer of boundaries, and then what are really the must-have boundaries, the boundaries that you can't live without. And and moving in a progression. So I start us out with, the beginner boundaries first.
Thank you. Thank you. Step number 3, conquering codependence and eggshells.
Yes, such a big one for so many people. And I think probably even just saying that, and even just saying the eggshells. So we all would know, we know what it's like to be walking on eggshells because we don't want someone else to be upset. And yet we usually language it in the terms of, I don't want to upset someone. I don't want to make him or her angry. And to really come back into the responsibility. And that's the codependency piece. The conquering codependence is the separation. I can't make anyone else feel anything. I only have power and responsibility over my sovereignty, over myself.
I want to talk about the most common symptom we have of codependence disease, guilt.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes. So, and here's what I say about guilt. Guilt is, to me now, an indicator that I am taking good care of myself. So when I feel guilty, right? When I feel guilty about, when I feel guilty in this scenario, in these kinds of scenarios, it's really just showing me that I am putting myself first.
Woohoo!
I'm honoring myself. Big time, woohoo.
So, and this is cool because I challenge people on lots of things where your true nature, if you're an empath, your true nature is never to hurt anybody else. And so when you think you're going too far, you can't even get close. There's no chance.
Right. I agree.
So how would you redefine then selfishness and self-respect?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of selfishness.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love it. And I think that it's one of the qualities that most people pleasers have disowned, because it's one of the last things we want to be called as selfish. So instead, we overcompensate by all the overgiving and all the overdoing. So I really believe that selfishness, self-love,
self-care,
and self-care,
the three sisters.
The three sisters, exactly, are the three sisters that support us in honoring ourselves. And I don't think that selfish is any different from self-love or self-care. It's just that selfish has gotten a bad rap.
So, and we're not, to be clear, we're not talking about narcissism here. If you're listening to it, there is a 0% chance of you hitting that on the spectrum. Let's go to step number 4, excavating your unconscious mind. And what did you learn from Debbie Ford about underlying commitments?
I just got chills because this was actually, for me in my own healing journey, one of the fundamental turning points of understanding that whenever there's a discrepancy between what we say we want and what we're actually experiencing, it's because there is an old underlying commitment in the mix, and we are serving the old master, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that old, outdated underlying commitment is something that kept us safe as a child, and yet becomes the seed of our self-sabotage as we become an adult. So it might have been a promise we made around, I'm going to stay quiet in order to feel safe, or I'm going to be invisible in order to feel loved, or, whatever promises we made to stay small, to stay contained. And this is really where, as I was saying earlier, this concept of packaging ourselves to be digestible to others, this is where this begins.
Well, you actually grabbed a briefcase, traveled halfway across the country to earn your worth. You're not worthy unless you show the world how worthy you really are.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what are disowned qualities?
So the disowned qualities are these qualities. So like I was saying with selfish before, the qualities that we don't want to be. So I'm not that. I'm not selfish.
Yeah.
I'm not needy.
Yeah.
I'm not lazy. And yet what will happen is, as soon as I disown a quality, you can be damn sure that there will be people rallying around me who I will be very quick to be able to point the finger at, saying, you're so lazy, you're so selfish, you're so needy. So we will draw toward us the people who embody these qualities, they really are there to be a mirror. They really are there to show us the parts of ourselves that we've been disowning and denying, and we've been overcompensating for. So, like I was saying before, so for example, lazy was a big one for me. I'm not lazy, and let me overcompensate for that by being an overachiever. So the more I overachieve, the less likely anyone can point a finger at me and say I'm lazy, and I can get righteous around disowning my laziness because I don't see it. And yet I'll have plenty of people rallied around me who reflect lazy back to me. So the goal is for me to find my own version of lazy. It might not be what someone else's is. It might not look anything else what I would point a finger at. But until I can find my own version of lazy, I will continue to be triggered by laziness in other people. So the goal is always to do the work here. I'm going to stop being triggered because I'm going to find this quality within myself and integrate it.
Well, it brings up three key words, which is really another way of talking about what we're talking about today: authentic, true nature.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yes.
a part of you that wants to be able to kick back and relax. Can I discover it and allow it?
Exactly. Can I give myself permission?
So,
Yeah.
thank you. What can you tell us about excuses?
Oh boy, we will use excuses to rationalize and justify just about anything. But the big thing here with boundaries is that I want you to be able to set the boundaries in your life and say no without excuses, without explanations, without reasons. We don't owe anyone an excuse or an explanation of who we are. And we too often will default and make excuses for why we can't set boundaries. We'll make excuses around other people's experience, other people needing us to do certain things. And again, this is taking others into account more than ourselves, which is just the way we start rationalizing and justifying.
Which brings us to our next piece of this complex, which is the what if syndrome.
So many of us get really caught up in the black and white of what if. That's what I see. And we'll start to awfulize, we'll start to catastrophize, and we'll go into that what if. And the what if is really about worry, and that takes us right out of the present moment and plops us into the future. So we're future tripping if we're in the what if. And we want to be able to come back to the present moment and respond and react from here and now around what is most important to us now, as opposed to what if, what will happen, and then the when then is sort of the what if and then the when then. It's like when this happens, then I'll be okay, or some version of that.
Which is always, always, always a chasing and never arriving. I want to take you to step number 5, and this has got me thinking of Anna Dea Judith. She's like the queen of chakras.
Yeah, I totally know her.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool. So she talks about having to learn how to expand our ability to hold energy. And that's what step number 5 is: get comfortable with the short-term discomfort.
That's right. So we want to trade out that long-term resentment for short-term discomfort. So if we can just be with whatever discomfort arises within us and know I'm not going to die from the discomfort I feel in saying no. I'm not going to die from the discomfort I feel in stating my preference for sushi tonight. Then when we're able to be with that discomfort for that short term, we are ensuring that we're not going to feel that built up, pent up resentment later on.
Thank you, thank you. I'm thinking of Ram Dass. He uses the term to snuggle up, and I talk about snuggling up with the cliff. You call it cozying up, but we're gonna call it snuggle up for fun here. How do we snuggle up with conflict?
This is something I feel really grateful that I have learned in the last, I would say maybe the last three years of my life.
Yeah.
Really how to be with conflict and stay in connection. These are not mutually exclusive terms. And most of us look at conflict, again, as something bad, something to be avoided, something to be feared, and something that means that all hell is going to break loose. But the truth of the matter is, I look now at conflict as conflict simply illuminates where you and I have differences. And it doesn't have to be about me doing everything to get you over to my side. And it doesn't have to do with you being hell bent on getting me over to your side. It's really about, can we acknowledge the container we're in where we have differences, and the conflict is simply illuminating these differences, but it doesn't mean we have to go out of connection.
And it doesn't mean that we have to say, well, okay, we're having conflict. I just need to submit now and give you yours and not take mine.
Exactly. So right in there with, most of us want to go in and acquiesce. We want to compromise. We want to do whatever it takes to keep the peace. We're in that loop of, what do I need to say or do to make everything be okay? Yeah. And again, when we're doing all of that, we have left the present moment. We've left honesty. We've left intimacy.
Thank you. So we're going to go to the next step, since we're talking about leaving the present moment, envisioning your empowered future. And I love this. What's a desire list?
So what I love about this particular step and this process of coming in contact with desire is really for so many people, this is the first time that they're considering themselves and what they really want, because we're so used to wanting for others. So the desire list is really getting in contact with, what do I want, especially if I remove the how. So we have to first start from the place of opening up to the wanting. And I think this is something that can be really threatening for some people. Opening myself up to the wanting, and then the other half of that is opening up myself to the having, because the receiving piece can be challenging for some people, especially the overgivers who don't know how to receive. And yet it's how we actually even out the equation.
I love it. And I love that you said removing the how, because what that means to me is there's a dirty, I don't know how many letter word it is, like a 10-letter word that begins with R, which is realistic. And when we say, I've got to be realistic, we completely squash our chances for happiness.
Completely. Yeah. So if we go in with being realistic, or we go in with the how, we've already crushed the desire. We've already like suppressed the desire and pummeled the desire. So we have to let the desire breathe and come into the full fruition without needing to figure it out quite yet.
Thank you. For myself, I would give people a homework assignment of each morning writing down, visualizing what it is you want from a feeling place. And it will grow so large that it will become inevitable that a way will be found. Speaking about inevitability, importance of pledging to ourselves.
This, here's the bottom line of everything that I'm teaching and that I'm sharing, because I believe coaching of any sort begins with our commitment to our own evolution. So I say to my clients flat out, this is about your commitment to your own evolution, and my commitment to hold you accountable to your commitment to yourself. And so this is the piece about pledging. And this is why I like to often begin the boundary conversation in, what are the boundaries I'm willing to set and commit to with myself? And what I find mostly, it's something around time for many people. Really, it's something around the way I'm going to honor myself and my time.
And at the very beginning of this, you said, Michael, here is my hard cutoff. Boom. Step 7, writing your scripts. And what are boundary language guidelines?
Ooh, I like this. So here's the first thing I'll say about this. The number one reason I hear that people don't set boundaries is they don't know what to say. Yeah. So I knew in creating this book, I needed to create a template that started to give people language. And the most important piece of this is to keep it in the I. So this is not pointing a finger at you and telling you what you are doing wrong. This is me saying, when an easy example, so let's say my husband drinks too much. I say to my husband, when we go out to dinner and you have more than 2 drinks, I feel uncomfortable. So if you're willing to only have 2 drinks, great.
I love how you already brought it back to the I feel uncomfortable. No
I feel
judgment.
uncomfortable. Nope, I feel uncomfortable. So I'm wondering if you're willing to only have 2 drinks tonight when we go out. Are you available for that? And there may be able to be a reasonable conversation. Then if it needs to escalate to the next place of, I'm just letting you know ahead of time, if you decide to have more than 2 drinks tonight, in order to take care of myself, I'm going to leave the restaurant. So again, no judgment, no blame. Just simply, here's what I'm going to do to take care of myself, and fair warning. And then what happens is, and this is the important piece, what he does or does not do does not need to hijack me.
And I love how you said, no more, no less. You covered it clean, succinct, to the point. This is not a negotiation. This is not a blurry line.
Right. And this also isn't the ultimatum of, I'm divorcing you.
No.
It's just simply, I feel uncomfortable. In order to take care of myself, here's what I'm going to do. You do what you want to do, and here's what I'm going to do. But like I said before, I have to be ready to walk out of the restaurant. Otherwise, I'm going to teach him that what I say and what I do don't line up.
Very, very cool. All right, step number 8, choose your beginner boundaries.
Yeah, so this is really just starting out very simply about the ones that don't feel high stakes, but feel like we can just start to set the boundaries in our lives, start to name our preferences. Again, where we are going to support getting our own needs met, because this is the other important piece about the boundary setting and the blame. We're so quick to blame other people when we don't get our needs met, but really our needs aren't getting met because we haven't asked for what we need.
Thank you. Step number 9, set your bottom line boundary. And along those lines, and a list of exhilarating outcomes.
Yes. So, I say earlier on in the book that there will always be a consequence to setting a boundary and not setting a boundary. And we just have to be clear on what we're willing to live with. So the list of exhilarating outcomes is really when we're able to tap into, wow, when I set this boundary, and a bottom line boundary is higher stakes. Let's just be honest here. Like, this is when we're really going for, this is a boundary that needs to be set in my life in order for me to feel good and feel free and live my life. And then if I can tap into the exhilarating outcomes, what becomes possible and available for me, what opens up for me when I set this boundary, that is what is going to propel me and fuel me into being able to set the boundary with ease and confidence.
Woohoo!
Mm-hmm.
Repeat until free.
So, I talk in the book about, if you really start embracing boundary setting as a way of life, you no longer have to set boundaries, because you're living in this way. You're living on a daily basis of honoring your own priorities, and you are able to set the boundaries with stick because it's just what comes out of your mouth. It just becomes the way of life. And so the repeat until free is, you've got the roadmap here. You've got the steps. Go back, take yourself through these steps, keep working it until it becomes embodied.
Is there ever a right time to set a boundary?
I think most people, I think no, because I think that's where the excuses come in. It's not the right time. It's not, it's not this, it's not that. So I don't think there ever is a right time. I think it's something that's more internal and organic of, this is what I need to do right now.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Where can people go to find your beautiful book, Nancy, and to find out more?
You can go to nancylevin.com. Everything is there.
fantastic. And any last words of wisdom before we jump into a really fast meditation to meet your boundary?
You're so sweet. No, I'm so excited. I'm pumped up about the conversation about boundaries always.
I can see it, and I can see why, because to me, that boundary, that what you think is a limit is really going to set you free.
Yes, I believe it wholeheartedly. I've experienced it myself, and I know it's possible for everyone who's listening.
Woohoo! All right. Would you have time for the shortest, briefest drop in
Yes,
of whatever you
we
call
will.
for?
I would love that. Yes.
And if you're
Yes.
driving
So
down the road, your boundary is do this later.
That's right. Close your eyes unless you're driving. And just take a moment here to settle into the present moment. And with each breath, give yourself permission to be here. Really give yourself your own undivided attention. And with your next breath, allow your awareness to drop down into your heart. And imagine that right here in your heart, you're able to access your own interior landscape. So you're able to look around your own interior world. And as you do, you may even need to light a candle to be able to see what's happening. You can tune in and listen, and you can feel into whatever is here in your own interior world. And with looking and seeing and hearing and feeling, take a moment to allow whatever needs your attention most in this moment to arise. Just allow this to arise, whatever needs your attention most in this moment. It might be something from the past, it might be something in the present. Just notice whatever needs your attention most. And simply acknowledge that you'll give yourself the attention that you need. And with your next breath, simply ask yourself, if I was ready to set a boundary in my life, what boundary would I set? So if you were ready to set a boundary in your life, what boundary would you set? You don't have to commit to it quite yet. Just presencing. And check yourself on the scale. Is this a beginner boundary or a bottom line boundary? If I was ready to set a boundary, what boundary would I set? Just so that you can start marinating in the possibility. And with your next breath, remembering that this is all about turning our attention on ourselves so that we're taking our attention off of others. Simply ask yourself, what is the most self-loving action I can take today? What is the most self-loving action I can take today? And what is this most self-honoring choice I can make today? So self-loving action, self-honoring choice, so that I can begin ever so slowly to bring my attention back to me. And then just take a moment here to do a little inventory of the boundary you'd set if you were ready to, the most self-loving action, the most self-honoring choice, and see which one of these you can commit to. Which one of these you're willing to commit. Which one of these you're willing to commit to in service of knowing that making yourself a priority and setting boundaries that stick is the gateway to your freedom. And with your next breath, simply give yourself gratitude and acknowledgement for your willingness to show up for you and to fully inhabit this extraordinary life that you've been given. And with your next breath, slowly begin to float back up and open your eyes.
Woohoo!
Woo-hoo.
I love you, Nancy. Thank you
I
so
love you
much.
too.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Like you said at the beginning or before the beginning, this book is putting it all together for you and helping people on so many levels.
Thank you. I feel it too.
Awesome, awesome. Got to crank it back up for the finish here. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get setting boundaries will set you free, and begin setting yourself free today and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Nancy.
Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Keep in touch. Let me know if there's ever anything I can do to help.
I promise.
When and if you do ever get back to the valley,
I will let you know, believe me. I promise.
Please,
I promise.
Please do. I got to let you go. Thank you again so much and have an amazing, amazing weekend ahead. And book launch. When's the book launch?
The book comes out on January 7th. And to celebrate the book coming out, my dear friend Gabby Bernstein and I are doing an event in New York City, one night only, on January 9th.
Awesome, awesome. I will keep that in there for you.
Great.
All right. Be well. Keep shining bright, Nancy.
Thank you, honey. Mwah. Take care.
It goes both ways. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I just had the most beautiful boundary setting interview with Nancy Levin. To check out more incredible videos on living your true, authentic self-life, click here, subscribe below.